Acts of the Apostles, chapter 23, lesson 24. In studying this chapter, 1. To consider the events of Paul before the Sanhedrin, 2. To review the plot by the Jews for Paul's life, and 3. To examine Paul's transport to Caesarea to appear before Governor Felix. When Paul was before the Sanhedrin council, he stated that he had lived in all good conscience before God. Ananias, the high priest, commanded that he be struck on the mouth. Paul responded, not knowing that he was the high priest, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? Those standing nearby asked Paul if he would revile the high priest. Paul then quoted the scriptures, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Acts 23, 1-5. Paul, looking steadfastly at the council, said, Brothers, I have lived before God in all good conscience until this day. The high priest, Ananias, commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit to judge me according to the law, and command me to be struck contrary to the law? Those who stood by said, Do you malign God's high priest? Paul said, I didn't know, brothers, that he was high priest. For it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Paul recognized that there were Sadducees and Pharisees present in the Sanhedrin. He made it known that he was a Pharisee, and that he was being judged concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead. This caused a dissension among the Sanhedrin, as the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, and the Pharisees did believe in the resurrection. The scribes of the Pharisees spoke out that they found nothing evil in Paul. Acts 23, 6-9. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. When he had said this, an argument arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say, There is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess all of these. A great clamor arose, and some of the scribes and the Pharisees' part stood up and contended, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or angel has spoken to him, let's not fight against God. The Roman commander became afraid that harm would come to Paul, so he ordered the soldiers to take Paul back to the barracks. Acts 23:10. When a great argument arose, the commanding officer, fearing that Paul would be torn in pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. The following night the Lord appeared and spoke to Paul. He was to be the Lord's witness at Rome, as he had testified for him in Jerusalem. Acts 23:11. The following night the Lord stood by him and said, Cheer up, Paul, for as you have testified about me at Jerusalem, so you must testify also at Rome. Some Jews then planned to kill Paul. More than 40 Jews banded together and took an oath to kill him before they ate or drank anything. The plotting Jews went to the chief priests and elders to present their plan. They requested that the chief priests and elders would contact the commander and have Paul appear before the council again for further inquiry. The 40 or more Jews would lie in wait to kill him along the way. Acts 23:12-15. When it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 people who had made this conspiracy. They came to the chief priest and the elders and said, We have bound ourselves under a great curse, to taste nothing until we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you with the council inform the commanding officer that he should bring him down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to judge his case more exactly. We are ready to kill him before he comes near. Paul's nephew heard of the ambush plot. He went to Paul in the barracks and told him what he had heard. Paul had his nephew taken to the commander. The commander took him aside and heard the plot. The commander told the young man to tell no one that they had spoken about the plot. Paul's nephew then departed from the commander. Acts 23:16-18. But Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, and he came and entered into the barracks and told Paul. Paul summoned one of the centurions and said, Bring this young man to the commanding officer, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the commanding officer and said, Paul, the prisoner, summoned me and asked me to bring this young man to you, who has something to tell you. Acts 23:19-22. The commanding officer took him by the hand and going aside asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" he said. "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though intending to inquire somewhat more accurately concerning him. Therefore don't yield to them, for more than 40 men lie in wait for him, who have bound themselves under a curse neither to eat nor drink until they have killed him. Now they are ready, looking for the promise from you." So the commanding officer let the young man go, charging him, "Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me." Next, Paul was sent to Felix at Caesarea by night. The commander had 2 centurions prepare the men to take Paul. 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearsmen were readied. They were to take Paul to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Acts 23:23-24. He called to himself 2 of the centurions and said, "Prepare 200 soldiers to go as far as Caesarea, with 70 horsemen and 200 men armed with spears, at the 3rd hour of the night." He asked them to provide animals, that they might set Paul on one and bring him safely to Felix the governor. Paul was to go before Governor Felix. The commander wrote a letter to Felix to accompany Paul. The commander, Claudius Lysias, addressed the letter to the most excellent Governor Felix. Acts 23:25-26. He wrote a letter like this: "Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent Governor Felix, greetings." The letter summarized the situation with Paul. The Jews had seized Paul and were about to kill him. Troops were sent to rescue Paul. In an attempt to learn of the Jews' accusation of Paul, he took him before the Sanhedrin council. He only learned that Paul was accused concerning questions of law, but nothing deserving of death or imprisonment. Acts 23:27-29. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came with soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. Desiring to know the cause why they accused him, I brought him down to their council. I found him to be accused about questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. The commander learned of a plot to ambush and kill Paul. Due to this discovery, he sent Paul to Felix and ordered his accusers to appear before Felix to state their charges against him. The letter gave Felix the background. Acts 23:30. When I was told that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him to you immediately, charging his accusers also to bring their accusations against him before you. Farewell. The soldiers, horsemen, and spearsmen took Paul by night to Antipatris. The next day the horsemen continued and took Paul to Caesarea. While the soldiers and spearmen returned, they presented Paul and the letter to Felix. Acts 23:31-33. So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. But on the next day they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. The governor inquired where Paul was from and understood that he was from Cilicia. He agreed to hear Paul when his accusers arrived. Felix had Paul held in Herod's praetorium. Acts 23:34-35. When the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. When he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear you fully when your accusers also arrive." He commanded that he be kept in Herod's palace. Acts of the Apostles, chapter 23, lesson 24, the end.